Hey, greetings, game changers. This is Classic Games Redefined. My name's Rich. Doing yet another one of videos in a series of videos on the abstraction of war games. I'm particularly focusing on abstract armies, chess variants, chess-like games, etc. My first case, in the future I might branch out other areas, but this is kind of a baseline we're working with. One of the things I'm looking at here is the integration of these games together, and with that, one of the things we're looking at right here is the basic idea of the initial setup and where the deployment areas. As you see in FidHS, for example, you see these pawns. Look at them here. In chess, for example, the way most people think of chess, you think of this row here and that row here as a deployment area. And because of the dynamics of it, you're used to the way chess developed. You have this big open area in the middle. If you see between this side here and that side here, you have 8 wide and 4 deep. The end result was the way chess develops because of the initial setup is that when you advance the pawns end up being behind the pieces. So you have much more of an offensive-oriented deployment area. In regards to this here, what I'll say here is that you have the lowest common unit, which is on the front line, the pawn typically. In chess-like games, you'll have them. You have the infantry or the foot soldier, typically, historically. This is your fodder that ends up going out and gets killed and pretty much defines the line. So I would say what you see here is that pawns will define where you have it. You may have certain games where you might want to have a piece deploy in front. There are some exceptions. Basic rule regarding that. Let me see if I can drop that back in there. Basic thing that you want to have here, and it's one of the guidelines that you want to have in anything. And note with these guidelines here, what you want to have is that you really don't want to have it. There are some exceptions, but generally, you don't want to have it that a piece, let's say I have a bishop deployed out here, would come down and could capture on the first turn. What you have here is like the Chinese chess cannon, for example, that leaps. That's one of the possibilities I have, and it's one of the difficult reasons why you have putting it into the thing. You don't want to have that capturing. Usually in the first turn, it leads to a reduction that happens. So here's one of the principles when considering setup. You might want to have consider limiting it. Your player can have it. You can also violate that exception. It's your choice, but you want to have it so that there isn't capture in the first round. Another thing too, you have to keep in mind the way pawns move. When you have a pawn moving 1 or 2 spaces forward, end result is that you have enough space here, and if you notice that the person has their half of the board and their deployment area isn't. But let's say we move the pieces up 1. Oh, sorry. Drop that back and drop that pawn back. Let's say I were to move this up 1. You move this up 1. Okay. Now we're into a near versus normal position. That's what part of my experience I had with this was my game near chess. So what you have that there, and then let's say you move this up 1. Now we're into full near chess, they call it here. You have a back row, which the pieces do it. End result was, if in this position here, I have a pawn in the third row, if I allow it to move 2, I am now throttling that piece there and doing it. You can, as a design standpoint, particularly if you're going to use a version of the Pyrrole setting up, you can allow that, but you have to keep that in mind. That throws the balance out of place. So therefore, normally what I have is a guideline with the pawns moving. And I was going to say this for another video now, that this neutral area, you really don't want a pawn to be able to invade that area. So if I push him up 2 here, I push it up 2, the space I'm going to have is 1. That's what I have for the pawn movement. So I want to have it. I don't want to have it that way. That if by nature of doing this, I have 2. But let's say, for example, we can allow, you have something set up here where you end up having 3 rows set up, where you can have a back row. This will free up a lot more pieces than you're doing here. It looks like a moon or a bow position. You then always hit a pawn here would only move 1 space forward. Pawn here can move 1 or 2 spaces forward. That's what I have. What I do generally is a principle on saying moving pawns in this area. If it starts in the back row, it goes 1 or 2. There's an interesting flexibility when you start a pawn back here if you allow 1 or 2. You could then have it the following. Go here, and then go there, and then go 2, or go 2 and then 1. It allows some interesting flexibility. So the basic guideline you have with the pawns is the pawns will govern by the thing, by the way they move. Here, where the setup area can be. If you're allowing pawns to move 3, say 1, 2, 3. Let's say I'm allowing them 3. 1, 2, 3. Then you need a bigger board. So that's what you're looking at regarding that, and that's where pawns relate. How the pawns move and their mobility and how much they put pressure on the other side is going to govern what an appropriate setup area is. I like 3. I like to have it. I like to have the basic rules, as I said there. You can do as you will. This is just general guidelines. This isn't a thing. Another thing, too, about this here, when you have a deployment area, this neutral area that you have set up, that you would be fighting over, that middle area right here, which you have, I'll show you right here. I'll just move the pawns over. That area, if you want to have more of an offensive positioning set up, you have that broader. Let's say, for example, we were to do this. Let's say we have 1 row back here. I'm going to move that back. Let's say we have that there and this here. If you were to do this, let's say you had to set up in another row back there, and you had this big area. This is another one where you had. You have a lot more area to position, so the play is governed, pretty much goes forward towards the offensive side of the game. And you do it. When you move closer, it ends up you do deployment in the back, which is one of the reasons why I kind of like the near formation setup regarding this here. I like this because it forces you to develop behind lines. One of the things that happens, though, when you do that, you have to have some sort of leapers to break through, because you can easily get, I'll call it an interweave picket fence, where this one's up here and that one's there and so on and so forth. And guys will end up like this here, that like that there, and nobody does it. So that's what you have. I probably will discuss pawns further. But here's the basic guideline. You want to be able to have, depending on whether you want to have a more offensive type game or defensive type game, that will govern how big this neutral area is in the middle. And also beyond that, how far the moves will govern how far the pawns move. Govern roughly how big of an area you can have. And again, I recommend having it that so long as that movement should be a maximum range that it goes within the first space with the pawn of the neutral area. That's what I'm going to recommend having here. Anyhow, pardon me, I'm starting to ramble a bit there. But anyhow, that's just some basic guidelines I have saying it. I just want to get something else out here for you to look further. And that's about all I can say about that there. I happen to like a setup like this here with 3 and allow this. This one here, by the way, gives you 8 more spaces in back here. 8 more spaces. Gives you 8 spaces back there and gives you something else. You can then allow it so that you can have the pawns that way according to what it was. So that is one of the basic guidelines. I like using 3. I could widen the board wider to the outside. I could have more in back. But this is, I think the closest is 2 spaces is about as close as you want to get, unless you're going to do something else to offset, and you can do that. I mean, you can do other things also. We can have an area of, let's say, an Immortal King. We're going to move the Immortal King here. And you would also, another thing I want to say here, let's say we do an Immortal King swap. The object of this here is to get your king across the board to the other side. Okay? You're able to do that. And the king can't be captured, so you're trying to defend it. Anyhow, unless you're going to have a basic setup here, which I like to have without the first capture, I like to have it so that you have the minimum of 2 spaces. Again, you can do whatever you want with it here. Just some basic guidelines I have here. I figure I can get out. I'll be doing more of these videos here, just discussing my experience working on this here, what you can do with things. And that's interesting. Looks like it froze up. So that is weird. My setup here, it's okay, but I'm probably running a high CPU. But anyhow, just don't worry about that back there. So I'm going to call it now. I'll try to upload the video, and that's about it. So I do want to thank you for watching. May your die always fall 5. Remember, don't hate the player, change the game. By the way, in the description below, we will have a link to this playlist for this here. So I'm out. Take care. This is yet another Tabletop Simulator video. So, okay, I hope that was somewhat useful. Feel free to post some comments below. I'm out. Take care. Bye.